Hi everyone, welcome back to the garden. I don't know if you saw my last video looking at stripping a Trachycarpus trunk, basically removing the fibre to create a stripy sort of tropical effect, basically the one behind me. Today it's the hotly anticipated but slightly predictable sequel to that video. Today we're planting the palm. Whether your palm then is a small young plant or a large mature specimen like the one I'm going to be planting today, whether it's a waggy with the stiffer leaves or the standard Trachycarpus fortunei, the most common Chinese Windmill palm here in the UK, the tips in today's video are equally applicable. I will mention about other palms because there's a few slight differences in how we'd actually plant them and the care you give them afterwards, but for Trachycarpus, the good news is they're really easy. So today's video, hopefully it'll be really helpful for you if you've just bought one of these new palms or you've been growing one in a container for a while and now you're looking to plant it out. This time of year, spring, it's a great time to plant these out. And that's actually the first thing I'll look at, when to plant these palms out. Later on in the video, there'll be loads of practical advice in terms of positioning the palm, actually planting it, and then aftercare to give your palm the most successful start possible. So let's get cracking with when. Before we get right into the action then, the first question, when should you plant out your Trachycarpus palm? Now there's a couple of different potential answers for this one. Firstly, we'll give the textbook one. If you want to be really good and give your palm the best chance possible, if you're not sure where it was actually grown before you got it, if it could have been grown in a greenhouse or somewhere warm, sheltered from the elements, then I'd wait till spring, probably mid to late spring. At that point then, the frosts are nothing to worry about because these are very tough, very hardy palms, but still the plant's not going to be absolutely shocked. The soil will be a bit warmer and it's got plenty of time to settle in while the soil's nice and moist before summer dries it out or it really gets some winter cold. So that's probably the textbook answer. Now the reality here in the UK, most of my advice is sort of based somewhere in the middle. We're literally in North Lincolnshire, which is about the middle of the UK. Generally speaking, you could probably plant out any size Trachycarpus, and in most modern winters, in most UK locations, it should be absolutely fine. There's a nice generic blanket statement for you. You'll hear stories of people that have literally got self-sown ones growing up under their palms, absolute forests of them, no problem at all. You'll hear stories of people planting out two-leaf seedlings, again in the middle of winter, growing away just fine. And equally, you might hear of people up in the Highlands planting mature ones in small pots with small root balls that really suffer. So I think it's one of those sort of situations really, take into account where you are and the time of year when you've actually got that plant. Personally, if I'd received a brand new big one in the middle of winter, for the sake of a few months when I could actually protect it in a garage or something, I would just wait to spring. But if it's a medium-sized plant, if you live in a part of the UK but doesn't see severe cold temperatures most winters, then I'd just go for it and get it in the ground. Ultimately, whilst palms aren't technically trees, I'd follow the same kind of rules, but for the best start for the palm, if you can plant it either autumn or spring, the soil's quite warm, there's plenty of moisture, and it's got plenty of time to really settle in before any extremes of weather. When it comes to planting other palms then, well, let me tell you a little bit more about the palms we can grow here in the UK. Firstly, you've got fan palms, and then secondly, you've got feather palms. They're the two general classifications of palms. Simply put, a Trachycarpus is a fan palm because that leaf or frond is literally like a hand or like a fan, as the name suggests. The other type are feather palms, like the Jubaea behind me, where the leaves literally resemble a feather, the pinnate leaves. So that's the general sort of classification. And what I would say is the advice I've just given you about pretty much any time of the year is okay to plant them, but generally spring is best. That is absolutely fine for Trachycarpus. But for feather palms, in particular Jubaea, Butia, Phoenix palms, the most commonly planted feather palms here in the UK, as well as other fan palms that you might not be quite as familiar with, Butia armata for example, or even the dwarf Mediterranean fan palms. With those, they actually prefer a sunnier spot. They prefer more drainage, and for those palms, I would generally wait until spring. Because if you plant those out, they've been grown somewhere like Spain or France, you plant them in the ground in November, then that pot, which has probably been actually quite dry previously, is just suddenly going to get saturated with water. And the one thing that those kind of palms don't like is being sat in water when it's cold as well. It's not a great mix, especially when you're trying to get your palm off to a flying start. So as a really general rule, which hopefully covers most things, Trachycarpus, if you live in most of the UK, you should be fine any time of the year. Jubaeas, feather palms, anything that needs a hotter, sunnier location, really give it the best start possible. Plant it in spring, ideally in a raised bed, something like this, and give it some really good drainage. But anyway, let's get on with the Trachycarpus, getting it in the ground and go through some real practical tips. On to practical planting advice then, and the first most absolutely crucial thing that you need to consider before you plant your palm is the positioning of it in your garden and how big it will eventually get. Now, regular viewers might find this slightly amusing because in my recent spring garden plans video, I did talk about planting a Butia feather palm somewhere where, with very quick hindsight, there really wasn't enough room for it. But I think the main point is, no matter how enthusiastic you get, no matter how much that spot seems like the right spot for that palm right now, you do need to consider just how it's going to grow and how it's going to mature in future. And that's especially true with Trachycarpus. Because they're so easy to grow here, they're so cold tolerant, chances are that palm will live in your garden happily for years to come. So you really want to have it somewhere that it really deserves, a place where it can grow to its full potential. Whether it costs you £5 or £500, it's always a shame to see a palm, or any kind of plant really, planted somewhere where it's restricted, having to be chopped back, or it's just simply in the wrong spot. Obviously, in terms of garden design, you can plant it wherever you want. Plant it at the front of a border, at the back, in the middle, by itself in the middle of a lawn maybe, or in a group of three. Do whatever you want to do. But when it comes to positioning, just have a quick look at a mature palm, like the ones behind me, and you'll see that each leaf can maybe reach out 1.2 meters away from the trunk, probably even more. So that whole plant's got a wingspan of around 2.5 meters, maybe 3 meters. It's something you need to consider. So practically speaking, if you've got a small plant in a tiny little pot with cute little leaves like my hands, maybe cute's not the right word, but we'll roll with it for now. If you've got a small plant like that, don't plant it somewhere just expecting it to grow slightly bigger, because that plant will soon, very quickly, have leaves like these behind me. Each of those will reach out over 1 meter. So it's not ideal for planting a small one next to a path, or especially next to your house. Now, the one that you'll see I'm planting soon is relatively close to a brick shed, but I know within a few years, or maybe 5 years or so, it'll be already reaching over the top of it, and it's not a house. I wouldn't plant it this close to a house for 2 reasons really. Firstly, wherever the leaves brush against another object like a wall or fence, they can get a bit tatty at the ends. So you don't really want that kind of look in your garden if you're really going for that lush, vibrant, tropical vibe. And the second reason is, practically speaking, palm's roots, they're not really going to undermine a foundation in the same way that a tree's roots do. Palm roots don't get any bigger as they reach from the plant, they stay the same size, but they've still got potential to dry out that soil. And if you live in a problem area with heavy clay soil, that can lead to potential subsidence issues just from having a lot of plants that really suck up that moisture in summer. So personally, I'd get it away from your house and somewhere where it's really got a chance to actually open those leaves up and really be enjoyed to its full potential. This then is the beautiful Trachycarpus fortunei that we'll be planting today. I did the stripping of the trunk myself in my last video, so check that out if you're interested to see how it's actually done. But whether yours has got a stripy strip trunk like this, or it's the more conventional, natural look, like this one here with the fibre still on, the advice I'm going to give is exactly the same for both. Stepping around here, just ignoring all that soil, this is the hole I've got dug ready for the palm. Now, again, if that was a house there, I definitely want to have it this close. But what I will be doing is planting it more towards this edge of the hole, away from the building a bit. Yes, we've got a fence there, and yes, we've got the brick shed, but this is a tall palm that's already established, so it won't be that many years before it starts to reach up and over the top of it. It'll certainly be over this fence in just a couple of years, so that isn't a concern at all. But like I said, if you're planting a small plant close to your house, just be aware of the wingspan and make sure you're not planting it close to anything that might actually affect the foundations. Even though palms aren't especially vigorous, it's still something to consider if you live in areas where it's a problem. A couple of questions you might have then: how big a hole do I need to dig for the palm, and do I need to add anything else to the soil at the time of planting? So to answer the first one, what size hole do I need to dig? Obviously I could sarcastically say it depends on the size of the pot, but ultimately the biggest factor is your actual garden soil. Now the good news is that Trachycarpus fortunei, they're very easy growing here in the UK, and they can cope with most garden soils. In most normal gardens, you could just dig a hole just a bit bigger than the pot, plant that palm, firm the soil back around it, keep it well watered the first year, and then just leave it to it, and it will grow away, be happy and healthy without a problem at all. But if you have got problematic or extreme garden soil, then Trachycarpus might need a few extra steps before you put them into the ground. So firstly, at one end of the spectrum, you've got your heavy clay soil. Trachycarpus like moisture, but they don't like being sat in puddles all year long, or especially not in the winter. So what you need to do is really break up that soil. Now this could mean physically actually breaking up, doing some digging, which I generally don't do a lot of here because we're quite blessed to have quite sort of normal garden soil. I just dig a hole about the size of the pot, put the plant in, and it's almost like a no-dig approach really of keeping the soil structure intact. But if you've got problematic structure like heavy clay, the best thing that you can do is either raise up the area, either with a sort of natural bank or something like that, or with quite a shallow raised bed, something about that, just to give the palm a little bit of space above that wet soil. But probably the single best thing that you can do is the winter before you plant it, put lots of organic matter down and lay it as a mulch. A really thick mulch, I've done videos about this. You can either use soil conditioner or farmyard manure. That'll help really improve the structure of the soil. And I know this sounds like a bit of a paradox, but what that will do as the worms drag it down is actually allow the water to drain through it more freely in winter, but then also improve its capacity to hold on to water in summer. So it creates a better habitat under the soil for your Trachycarpus all year long. And guess what? When it comes to the sandy soil, I do exactly the same. Put plenty of mulch on it, add lots of organic matter, which can be compost you've made in your own garden. It can be that soil conditioner, and it can be farmyard manure. Anything like that that you can add into it. All that organic matter, it helps the soil hold on to more moisture. So while sandy soil, it's not perfect for these Trachycarpus, they don't need really sharp drainage, and they won't like being completely dry in summer. Anything that you can add to the soil at the time of planting will be brought down, and it will really help it hold on to more moisture. So either way, what we're trying to do is bring an extreme soil or extreme environment somewhere into the middle where Trachycarpus will be perfectly happy and perfectly healthy. But anyway, that's enough rambling on. It's time to get the palm out of the pot and into the ground, which is easier said than done when it's in a pot this big. This is a 130 litre pot. It'll be substantially easier to get them out of a small pot. But most of the palms here in the garden that are already in the ground, I had those in 160 litre pots. So this should be slightly easier than that. That being said, I'm a bit out of practice, so it's definitely going to be a bit of a battle. We might have a sort of controlled layover of the palm. I think it's probably best that way because that pot isn't moving. Sometimes if you give them a good tap, the palm actually loosens, but no, not today. So I've just basically laid it on its side, but this bit is only relevant if you've got a palm in a giant pot, obviously. I thought after a Trachycarpus trunk stripping video, the innuendo wouldn't get any worse, but today, to get this one out, I'm basically gonna have to straddle the trunk, put the back of my legs against this pot, and pull that trunk through to get it to come out of the pot cleanly, because it's just far too heavy to pick it straight out. So I'll have a go at that now. And there you can see it's actually moving. And it's actually come out pretty cleanly. Then we'll just get the pot away and stand the palm up. I'll be honest, that was actually a lot easier than I was expecting. This is the root ball then, and as you can see, it looks nice and healthy, full of roots and ready to grow. But equally, it's not completely full. You don't have roots circling around at the bottom, which would be a sign it's been in the pot too long. And I know conventional advice these days is to actually tease some of the roots away on a lot of plants, basically just encourage them to grow outside of this root ball and into the soil. But for palms, I generally don't bother, or I don't generally recommend it, because some palms like Butia armata, they don't like the root disturbance. Now, Trachycarpus, they're a lot more forgiving, but with something like this, I don't really see the point. Here in the garden, they seem to grow away nicely, so I'll be leaving it exactly as it is. Now, one pro tip when it comes to large plants, if you're not entirely sure that your hole's the right size, you don't want to lift that plant in, just then have to lift it back out again. It's a lot of effort and you might end up breaking more soil away than you need to. What you do, get the pot, this might be really basic, but it can help you, and place it in the hole. And from there, we can see that it's roughly about the right depth. I'm not too concerned about this side because I will be topping this up ever so slightly, but most of it, that looks about right. So first time, still got it. It's now time then to get the palm in the ground. And unfortunately, I haven't got any really good labour saving tips for getting it closer to that hole. I think what I should have done rather than showing you how I was taken out of the pot over there, perhaps done that close to the hole, that would have really helped me out. But now there's no option but to put some graft in to get this plant over to the hole. And I think really the only two important things here are to actually treat that root ball with a bit of respect, or as much as you can do, as you'll probably see. And also make sure the palm is upright if you want it perfectly upright, or if you do want it at a bit of a lean, like I'll be doing this one here, lean it just away from the brick shed, then make sure you get that right before you push the soil down around it, because there's nothing worse than having to level a plant up and put some really heavy force through your foot, because you can end up damaging those roots, snapping them, and the palm just being really unstable. So now it's time to get this moved to the ground. And it doesn't walk very well. It was at this moment I heard a ripping sound, and this happened to my jeans. So I guess really the palm did get its revenge for the awful treatment it suffered in the last video. A bit of messing around later then, and the palm's finally in the hole. That would have been significantly easier with a smaller plant, obviously, but with this big one, I had hoped that I could just walk it over slowly and gently place it into the hole. As it was, that was never going to happen today, so I had to pick the whole plant up and then basically plonk it as carefully as I could into that hole. But one important thing, especially with a big plant like this, before you put that soil in around it, you need to look at it from every side you can and make sure you're happy with how it's stood up and the direction it's turned. So this one, from this angle, it does look quite close to that brick shed. In reality, there's probably a bit bigger gap than you might think. So I've looked at it from the side. I'm happy with how it's stood up, the direction it's facing. So it's now time to firm that soil around it. And it's just a case of digging the soil, pushing it round the sides and gently firming it down with my foot. That's all you need to do, nothing crazy. And what I will do is I'll make sure that the top of the root ball is level with the surface of the soil. With palms like these, I don't think there's any significant advantage in most gardens to either raising them up or sinking them down. You're more likely to create problems in terms of it drying out in summer or getting flooded in winter. So just go level with the surface of the soil in the pot and you can't go far wrong. So there we are then, the Trachycarpus is in place, and I think it looks fantastic here. It definitely gives some vertical interest to the border, and you've got that nice sort of pattern as it drops down to the phoenix and onto the tree ferns over there. So I think the green works fantastically well against the shed. And like I said with this one, I don't mind that it hangs over the fence ever so slightly. My neighbour doesn't mind. And it's also just about touching that brick shed. But I know with a palm like this, that's absolutely ready to grow as soon as it's planted out in the ground, it won't be long before it's clear of both and growing away up into the sky. So the next thing I need to do, well, there's two things really. Give it a good water in and then consider what I'm planting around it. That's the fun bit. And I think now you can see it next to the phoenix. It's very obvious that that Butia palm over there, there's no way that would have fitted there as well. I think realistically, I'm probably going to go for a euphorbia or something. Maybe some small Mahonia soft cress at the back there in the slightly shadier spot, and then potentially a dwarf Mediterranean fan palm at the front. I think that'll be a nice sort of palmy wall and certainly a great place to relax in the summer. The sun then has dipped below the horizon, but the palm's planted in the ground and I'm really happy with how it looks. And it's just time for a couple of care tips for newly planted palms. The first one is, especially with Trachycarpus, don't let them dry out in summer. Like any tree, you need to give them a bit of TLC for that first year because they've only got a comparatively small root ball from being grown in pots. So you want to keep it well watered. Don't let it dry out, especially during those hot summer days, which will eventually be here, I promise. Don't let it dry out and give it a good soaking maybe every week or so when it hasn't rained significantly. It'll really thank you for it, the leaves will be greener and it'll grow significantly quicker next year. In terms of feeding then, some people add bloodfish and bone or bone meal to the hole at the time of planting. Other people use a mulch of farmyard manure or soil improver. Both of those are fine. But I think the reality is, in most garden soils, Trachycarpus are not heavy feeders and they should grow away just fine in normal soil. But if you really want to look after your Trachycarpus, if your palm's your baby and you want to give it the best start possible, then some feed through the summer months, especially in that first year, will really help it settle in. And if you've got unlimited funds, because they can get quite expensive, you can use Palm Booster and Palm Focus. Just follow the instructions on the bottle and that'll really pep them up and get those roots growing into the ground. But what I tend to do here, I buy liquid seaweed in quite big containers, dilute that down, and it seems to be a great feed for any kind of palm. Your Trachycarpus will absolutely love it. The leaves will be greener and it'll grow significantly faster. But like I said, they're not entirely necessary, and if you've got good soil, you don't need to do anything, just the watering. So that's how to plant the Trachycarpus then. What started off as quite a simple video idea, like a lot of mine, it's evolved into a video, an absolute battle getting that beast into the ground, but I hope it's been really helpful for you, or at least moderately entertaining. So thanks for watching as always. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya!